Hello and good Wednesday to you all. Welcome into Believe in Purdue. I'm Sam Springer, as always, joined by Grant Flora. Grant, um, not the Wednesday episode we'd wanted to have.
Nope, not definitely not the episode we wanted. It wasn't unexpected, but it was one. Would have been nice to have a nice win over Michigan State to get things back on track, and instead, this feels like they're getting a little further into a hole that's going to be tough to get out of. But yeah, definitely still a few more weeks left. Big Ten chances are starting to fade away, but I mean, there's still a lot more basketball left to play, and again, it's tough to be too critical of things because they're playing good teams, but at the same time, pretty much every game they played felt winnable. And yeah, it's just not a tough, or it was a tough Tuesday night game to watch, just going into Breslin, having to try and battle a tough Michigan State team when you're already kind of down 2 games. And yeah, it was just a bit of a tough one.
Well, as everybody knows, the Boilermakers extend their losing streak with a 75-66 loss in the Breslin Center, like you mentioned last night in East Lansing. This was a one that seems like we're going through the same stuff over and over. At least in my head, is the bench is still really deficient, but yet we still have some deficiencies in the starting lineups with maybe the production as well. Grant, only two players in double figures, which Trey Kaufman ran 24 points. He's as consistent as as can be. Braden Smith 17. He had only 8 assists, and I say only because he's coming off of normal games of where he gets 10 to 12, maybe 13, but he had 6 turnovers as well. This is hats off to Michigan State for playing better, good defense, but at the same time, where's this offense going?
Yeah, it's really been one dimensional. It's been Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn trying to make things happen and pick and roll with pocket passes. The same thing we've seen all season, and it works pretty well. It's tough to guard, except if it's the only thing you do, then someone's going to figure out how to stop it. And
Right.
Michigan State obviously didn't stop it perfectly because Trey Kaufman-Renn still scored 24, Smith still scored 17. But they slowed it down and they took Purdue out of everything else they wanted to do. And that just made it really, really difficult. And if you're only going to have 1 or 2 options offensively, it's just never going to bode well for you when you have talented defenses, solid defenses like Michigan State, and then your defense isn't performing well enough to really slow things down and keep you in the game. Because I know Michigan State only scored 75 points, but in that second half, when Purdue needed stops to make a run, they just couldn't get them. Michigan State tore them up.
Well, I was in transit between a couple of different places, and was able to pay attention to the GameCast from ESPN for a little bit, and there were multiple times that I'm sitting there, and it's finally catching up, and it says layup made, short jumper, tip it, and like those were the shots that it seemed like Michigan State was getting pretty late in the second half, or about midway through the second half, that made me really concerned for the second game in a row. The defense was faltering at the hoop, and that's the concerning part. It's not necessarily Trey Kaufman-Renn that is the concerning part, because he's still doing what he can, but everybody else seems to be at one point or another in the defensive possession, breaking down and allowing a hoop within 5 feet of the basket.
Yeah, and definitely I'd say it's defense. It's also rebounding tied in with that because you can get offensive rebounds for easy baskets that happen several times for Michigan State. Also, it's tough for Trey Kaufman-Renn because he's trying to not get fouls called against him because he's had foul trouble recently. And so he's playing defense, but he's kind of playing half defense where he's trying to be there, but you can't be there too much or else you're going to put yourself in a position to get a foul called against you. And I don't know if you saw this because, like you said, you were in transit and we weren't necessarily able to watch the full game. But they called his second foul in the first half. Still, I think 10 minutes to go in the first half. and it was absolutely ridiculous. He hardly did anything.
Yeah.
You could say there was a foul on Caleb first, but it should not have been called against TKR. They still brought him in a couple minutes later. They had to play him. But those are the types of things that it might not have affected his minutes all that much because he played most of that first half anyway because they needed him to. But it affects how you play the game and especially how you defend and how you rebound. And that makes it really tough for these Purdue post guys when they're already a little undersized to handle things down to the post.
Well, and you mentioned that he got his second foul about midway through the first half. He ended the game with 2 fouls, so he played a very clean rest of the game for the time that he was in. But still, yeah, and say what you want about the Big Ten referees or referees with reffing Purdue games or whatever. I honestly don't think they have a personal vendetta towards Purdue. Come on, this is like, take the tinfoil hat off if that's what you're trying to say. We've hit. Let's say what this is. This is a huge slump that Purdue's going through. That can they fix it? Absolutely. I would rather them go through it in the beginning of February than the beginning of March. That's definitely something that I would rather happen if you're going to have to go through it. We totally have expected, and we said as much in our first couple of shows, Grant, Purdue's going to have 7-8 losses this season going into the tournament. It's just going to happen because they're not what they have been in the past couple of years. When you take such a big presence from the center, you're going to go through ebbs and flows to where everything's going to go right, and then it's going to seem like everything goes wrong. Don't get me wrong. It's not pleasant going through it, but it happens. It really does. We remember a couple years ago when Smith and Lawyer were freshmen, Purdue went through a little bit of a slump and people thought there's the end of the world. Well, it kind of was, but at the same time, because that was the season that led to the first round out against a 16 seed. But not the point of we're going to go through it and we're going to be a better team coming out the other side of it. So I really do think that while this is refereeing, while it is unfortunate, they're going to miss calls every single game, and it's going to seem like that you're blinded by, well, they screwed that call on us. They screwed that call up on us. You don't see the ones where we got away with something because they missed the call on them, So but the slump is what is concerning. The lack of bench performance is what's concerning now. Can that change? Absolutely, it can.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. I'm not trying to put this loss on the referees by any means.
I didn't mean to say that you were.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of calls that were definitely made that shouldn't have been, but I think you could say the same thing for Michigan State. I think there were a couple of calls that went Purdue's way that shouldn't have been made. I think the one on TKR in the first half was probably fairly impactful, given it was the second. But yeah, overall, I feel like these last 3 games, like you said, we've been seeing the same thing. It's kind of been the same game played 3 different times where Purdue's gotten off to a decent start, even gotten a lead, but then they just really hit this slump and they can never get out of it. Officiating has maybe contributed a little bit in the sense that they've gotten some foul calls that either shouldn't have been called or just they put themselves in bad positions to have those calls made that then took guys out of the game that they needed to be in the game. But it was also rebounding, and it was also their defense, and the fact that Braden Smith has been kind of flustered and frustrated each of these last 3 games, at least at some point. He still scored better against Michigan State, but he had 6 turnovers.
Right.
And a lot of them were just passes he tried to make that probably shouldn't have made, maybe got in the air and had nowhere to go with it. So it's like the same teams, these last 3 teams, I should say, are kind of having similar game plans, and they're working really well. So Purdue has to start to figure out what are we going to do in these situations, because when we get into March and a team looks at game film and looks at how to beat us, this is going to be the formula. And if we can't find a way to overcome that formula, we're going to get beat no matter who we play.
And to all of those people who are saying this is a Matt Painter problem, is a horrible game planner, stop. Because for one thing, You don't get to be a top 5 winningest coach in Big Ten history. That's where we're at right now with Matt Painter, by not knowing how to coach correctly. But at the same time, and correct me if you don't agree with, or say something if you don't agree with this, Grant. But Matt Painter, I think, has a certain broad game plan in place, but he also lets his guys kind of decide what kind of direction they go. He has a general game plan, he puts it in place, and then he gives Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, TKR, all those guys a little bit of artistic choice of how exactly things go. Now, he can make those adjustments, but at the same time, stop. This man is a fantastic game coach. He game plans just fine, or he wouldn't have won the last 2 Big Ten championships. Granted, I understand Zach Edey's there. That makes it a little easier. But the fact remains is this program, when he took it over 20 years ago, was not in good shape. It just wasn't. It was a very poor program at the time, and he's turned it into what it is now. So let's stop with the Matt Painter doesn't know how to game plan. Just stop.
Yeah, and there's another stat I was actually just hearing about over on Sleepers Media. They were discussing this, and I don't want to try and make it seem like this is a huge factor, but at the same time, I think it's something to be mindful of. Purdue is averaging, what was it? No, I think 10 of their 20 Big Ten opponents this season have over 5 days of rest when they play Purdue. And Purdue is averaging almost a full day less rest than their opponents when they play them. I think the stat is 0.85 in the negative when they play their opponents. You look at this. Purdue had to come off a tough loss against Wisconsin on Saturday and have 2 days to figure out how they're going to go into Michigan State and not only game plan for them, but figure out how to beat them when it's not even on their home floor. That's extremely difficult to do. And then Michigan, for the Wisconsin game, they had more time to game plan. That was more of a performance issue.
Right.
But the fact is, throughout this entire season, this entire Big Ten season, they've been playing teams who have been coming off quite a bit of rest, and Purdue's had a shorter turnaround, and it's really tough to game plan for that. It's also fatigue could be a factor, and this kind of goes into their next game against Indiana. They get some more days to rest and more days to game plan, but Indiana's going to have 9 days. They haven't played since last Friday, and they're not going to play Purdue until Sunday. So Purdue, they have the shortest turnaround of any team in the Big Ten. No team has that negative 0.85 day average that Purdue does. Michigan State actually is the team that's closest to them at like negative 0.5. But I think this has kind of been a theme for Purdue throughout the season as they're trying to come in and play teams on a bit shorter of a turnaround, and it just becomes a little more difficult. Do I think that is the reason they're losing these games? No, I think the things we've talked about are the ways they haven't been able to play well. But I think it just makes it a little bit harder, especially when you're already in a slide, when you're already not playing great basketball and you're trying to figure things out against tough opponents, and not have that time in between games to prepare and to fix those issues can be pretty significant.
Yeah, pressure to end a streak is real, and it gives you an added thing to where it makes it hard to overcome. So going into Assembly Hall on Sunday, they're going to have the pressure of the crowd, the rivalry, and then, oh, hey, by the way, you're trying to end a 3-game losing streak too. So those are added things. With the whole concept of the three-game losing streak, Purdue has held large leads in all 3 of those games. Now, last night wasn't as, I think they had a 6 to 8 point game lead in the first half at one point, but Michigan State closed that out and actually led at the half. But both of the other games, Michigan, double-digit lead in the second half, double-digit lead in the first half, couldn't put it away. Wisconsin, they had a 9-point lead in that first half, and then, they ran into a Wisconsin team that ended up not able to miss a shot. Now, part of that was given from the ability not to play very great defense for the full 30 seconds, but still, Wisconsin was hitting their shots. when they were taking them inside the arc. And last night, you have a visiting you're visiting, you have a lead, and as you give up that lead, you can just hear that crowd taking over, much like it does at Mackey when Purdue does it to teams. And at no point did I feel comfortable after that they lost that lead that maybe I didn't give up hope that Purdue could win, but I just didn't see them pulling away at any point. This was going to be back and forth, and if they didn't do things right, they were going to lose by double digits, and they almost did.
Yeah, they never were able to respond when Michigan State started gaining their momentum.
Yep.
And that's what you have to do on the road. That's what Purdue was really good at last year. And because they had a guy like Zach Edey, you could just throw it into and he could score basically at will. So when you needed a basket, you could almost ensure that you're going to get it. And that was really helpful on the road when you were facing teams that were starting to make a run and gain that momentum. This year, Trey Kaufman-Wren's been pretty consistent. He can score when he wants to, but he doesn't have that physical advantage. So teams, if they really want to, can just bring another guy and they can really force it out of his hands. If you force it out of his hands, you have to rely on Braden Smith, who's been pretty good, but also hasn't been searching for his offense as much. Fletcher Lawyer has been very, very much less of a factor than what he should be, in my opinion.
He's been very erratic.
Yeah, and we can talk about that more too. Only took 5 shots, scored 8 points still, which 8 points on 5 shots isn't bad at all, but he should be taking more than 5 shots. Right. And everybody else is much less of a factor and much less of a threat for the defense. So it's much harder for Purdue to get those stops and those momentum shifts when they're on the road and they're playing a team that's rolling.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and take a quick break for the audio podcast, and then we'll get back to the analyzing of the game in East Lansing and maybe some other overarching concerns or good things that we've got. There are good things still, about this team. But let's take a break real quick, and we'll be right back. You're listening to BLEAV in Purdue on the BLEAV in Lounge Sports Network. Okay, we are back. So, Grant, we were talking on the other side of the break. Some of these things that are concerning about Purdue. Fletcher Lawyer only taking 5 shots in a game that Purdue had to have. Now, his assist numbers were up comparatively. He had 5 assists last night. That's only 3 less than Braden Smith had. But do we need what? Why is he all of a sudden, being so passive? I really don't understand what is with Lawyer, because he's passed up a lot of open threes and he's our best 3-point shooter. Now, I'm not saying, hey, chuck him up from the cheap seats every time, but when you've got some open threes, why are we not taking those?
Yeah, I don't really have a great answer. I would maybe attribute it somewhat to rhythm. I think he's gone up against defenders that have been really focused on shutting him down because he's one of Purdue's best 3, and because he tends to lack in athleticism compared to some of those other backcourt players that he goes up against. It can be difficult for him to create his looks, and when he's done that, he's kind of gotten the ball shoved down his throat. I mean, he's gotten blocked and he's turned over when he tries to drive and penetrate. Not that he's done it very often, but when he has, like there were a couple times against Michigan State, I think he drove it and it was stripped away from him. Another time where maybe he went up for a really tough shot, maybe looked for a foul call, didn't get it. And so he hasn't been great from 3. He's made a couple of them when he's been open, but he's also missed some open ones. So he just hasn't been really feeling it from beyond the arc. And when you aren't in that good rhythm, it can be hard to still be aggressive and to still go after it. Now, I think he should be, but I think it can be difficult. And when Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Wren are controlling the ball most of the time, and you're kind of that third option, that maybe is contributing to why he isn't being as aggressive. It's a bit of a different Fletcher Lawyer slump than we're used to. We're used to him just kind of hitting a cold streak where he just can't seem to make much from beyond the arc. That's just kind of happened, I think, these last 2 years with him. This year, it's more like he just can't get the shots that he wants, which is understandable because you don't have Zach Edey when you did the last 2 years. But when he can't get them, he's capable of creating them. but he's just kind of out of a rhythm and isn't able to get that.
Well, and yet again, we're talking again that the bench is still, and I'm not asking for 30 points, Grant, really not, but 11 points from the bench. Whereas for the Spartans, they had, let's see, 14, 35 points from their bench. If we can produce more than 11 points, and I'm not complaining about Cam Heidi, I'm not complaining about all these guys, but at the same time, it's a difficulty for Purdue to be successful if they're not getting some bench production, because that would allow Braden Smith to take more than 1 minute off. That would it's frustrating to see that the bench could be doing something a little bit more maybe, and I'm concerned that when we get into March that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Jakari Harris has been he's probably been their best bench guy in Big Ten play, just coming off the bench, being able to knock down a shot and defend. Tonight, or I should say last night, he was 1 of 3 from 3. And I mean, I was glad he took the shots that he did, although there were a couple of them I thought he should have maybe passed it one more time and gotten a better look. But I haven't been too frustrated with him given the minutes he's provided. I feel like they've been good. Cam Heidi came in and did a great job last night. I mean, he was 2 of 3 from beyond the arc. He felt like he did some good things overall.
Right.
But with him, I think he needs to become more than just a shooter. And that's what we've seen this season is he rotates around. When he's open for 3, he takes it. Outside of that, he really doesn't do anything offensively. I would love to see him drive the basketball more. We've seen him do that a little more lately, actually. It just hasn't really resulted in anything. But I still remember at the end of that Texas A&M game way back in December, he had just a blow-by drive, and next thing you know, he's junking it one-armed at the rim and flying around. I'm like, this is the Cam Heidi we should be seeing, and it's the one we're capable of. Miles Colvin, same thing. He had a good game against Wisconsin, but just it's like 1 in every 6 or 7 games that these guys are really producing, and that is far too inconsistent.
And the reason why this is a concern, or it's being brought up as a topic, is because we can see more from these guys that they're giving at the time that they're in the games now. Excuse me. We've seen Cam Heidi be a spark plug, hit a couple of big shots and then have a big dunk, or Miles Colvin hitting 3 threes and at a very important part of the game, and then having a breakaway dunk, or something. So that's why it's a concern going forward, because we're seeing 0s and 4s and 2s from their production offensively, and at some point we've got to have a 12 or 15 from each of these at some point for us to feel that it's starting to come around. It's really my biggest concern with these guys.
Yeah, and I do feel like Painter's done a nice job these past few years of like developing some of those guys, and when they get into the Big Ten tournament and NCAA tournament, a couple of these bench guys come in and they make an impact you really weren't expecting.
Yeah.
So I'm not doubting that this can happen, but I agree. The bench production just hasn't been there. And even CJ Cox, Caleb First have been inconsistent. They've done some nice things in the starting lineup away from scoring, but the vast majority of the scoring has been Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, TKR, and those guys are going through the grind just like everybody else. And when they start to struggle a little bit, like Braden Smith has, definitely like Fletcher Lawyer has, if no one is there to step up, then you're going to see Purdue as a team be negatively impacted by that, and we've seen that these last 3 games.
I was going to say that that's kind of where we're sitting at now. Is we're seeing the negative impact from relying on the big 3 to be pretty much the only scoring we have in our repertoire. And last night, even one of the big 3 was taken away from us in the aspect of maybe not enough open shots to where he didn't feel comfortable. Lawyer didn't feel comfortable taking. That's why he only took 5. I don't know. A lot of this though, Michigan State, really good basketball team. Honestly, if there was a couple of plays that go different ways each way, uh, that might be a 5-point Purdue win. Like this, all in all, even though we can kind of see some glaring issues, this was still a close enough game at multiple points that if just a couple of things happen, all of a sudden Purdue's got the momentum, and Purdue is winning by 5 or 6 late in the game, and it turns into a 9-point Purdue win. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, that's grasping at some things, but at the same point, that's how imperative it is to have some production from your bench, because if your bench can produce some, that might sway the momentum to your side during some critical points, and our guys just haven't been able to do that recently.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, easily could have been worse.
Oh, sure.
This is the game that I thought Purdue would lose weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they had a chance to win at Chrysler. Definitely would win at home against Wisconsin, but I was like, at Michigan State, I really don't see them being able to win that game, at least very easily. Like, it could happen, but like, it's just not likely.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to come in and give Michigan State a game and never be out of it, and they were even in control a little bit early on, was good to see, because like this is a game, especially when you're on a skid, it could have easily been a double-digit 15, 20-point blowout if
Mm-hmm.
Purdue hadn't shown up. But they did, and they battled, and again, we saw some good things. Cam Heide was very confident from beyond the arc. That's huge. Like, his shooting just hasn't been there recently.
Mm-hmm.
And so to get him going a little bit would really help this team if he can build off of this game. It's unfortunate they fouled out, because that was another one of those calls that was just like, I don't know where that foul came from on his rebound that fouled him out. But, I mean, it wasn't all that impactful anyway. It was late enough in the game. I don't think Purdue was going to win. But his performance was nice. Braden Smith got back on track a little bit, scoring the ball. Still, his shooting was a little not really there. It was 3 of 9 from 3. Would like to see that number increase a little bit, maybe go 5 of 9. But outside of that, he only missed 1 shot. Like, he did better offensively. And Trey Kaufman-Renn is the usual Trey Kaufman-Renn. So, like, we still are seeing things that Purdue has to have to be good. It's just we have to see some others fill in the gaps for them to get over the hump.
Yeah, it's not the sky is falling. This is a slump. It absolutely is a slump. It's not going to be an easy fix. It's not going to be an easy way to end the slump going into Assembly Hall on Sunday. But right now, we've seen our guys be able to play against. No, there are some teams that maybe aren't the higher rung of the Big Ten that Purdue's kind of beaten up on a little bit. But you know what? Everybody should be. It's those games that you play against the upper tiers that make you the team you are. And right now, Purdue isn't as good as they've been in the past 2 years, but they're still a really good program. They're a really good team. Mike DeCourcy has them as the 3 seed right now. That may change with Friday's. With his outcoming Friday bracketology. But, like he said, even if they were to go completely, dark, they're probably no worse than a 5 seed, because they are that good. They've got some good wins. They've got good one losses. So the losses that they have aren't to teams that they shouldn't be losing to. They're teams that, okay, if they win, great, but if they're not, it's not as detrimental, and that's where we are right now in that schedule. So it'll be interesting to talk about the IU. This is a big one for Purdue, and so thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday version of Believe in Purdue for Grant Flora. I'm Sam Sprunger. We'll see you on Friday.